You're sitting across from a woman who shouldn't be alive. Her hands are steady when she pours the tea. The apartment in Astrachan is small, warm, filled with the smell of bread and something else, something like wild honey and old wood. She watches you with eyes that have seen too much and remembered all of it. You want to know about the old woman, she says. Not a question. You nod. She's quiet for a long time. Outside, the Volga moves like it always has, carrying water and memory and things we've forgotten to ask about. Finally, she speaks. I was 7 years old, dying. The doctors had sent me home. My mother carried me through the snow to the old woman's house. I remember the sound before we even reached the door. Like bells, but not bells. Something older. She pauses. The old woman put her hands on my chest. The sound got louder. I could feel it in my bones. Warm, like sunlight was living inside the sound. Another pause. Longer. 3 days later, I was running again. The tumor was gone. Completely. The doctors couldn't explain it. She looks at you directly now. The old woman died in 1958. They came for her papers the night she died. American men, Russian men, they worked together. Which should tell you something. They took everything. Her instruments, her journals, even the stones she kept by her door. She leans forward. But they couldn't take what she put inside me. I'd never been sick since. Not once. Not a cold. Not an ache. I'm 91 years old and I feel like I'm 30. Her hands don't shake when she lifts the cup. The sound is still there, inside me. Sometimes late at night I can almost hear it again. Think about what that means. Not just that someone could heal with sound, that the sound persists, that it changed something fundamental in the body, something that doesn't fade over decades, something we've been taught doesn't exist. I didn't believe her at first. That was 3 years ago. I was in Astrachan researching something else entirely. Caspian trade routes, mundane and forgotten. The woman's story was supposed to be a footnote. Local, color, the kind of thing you note and discard. But I kept thinking about those hands, 91 years old and steady. I started asking questions. In the market, an old man selling dried fish. The old woman? Zoya Petrovna. My grandfather said she saved half the village during the typhoid outbreak of 41. She'd go into homes where people were dying, and that sound would start, like the air was singing. Most of them lived. At the library, a retired teacher. There were stories about her when I was young. We weren't supposed to repeat them. Something about the old empire, before the revolution. Healing chambers built into the walls of certain buildings. She knew where they were. She knew how to wake them up. At the Armenian church, a priest who served wine with hands that trembled. I was 6 months old. Pneumonia. My mother took me to her in desperation. She placed me on a table made of black stone. The stone hummed. I felt it before I heard it. My mother said I stopped struggling after a few seconds. Just listening. By morning, I was breathing normally. The stone was warm to the touch for 3 days after. Each person I spoke to became quieter when they talked about her, as if the memory itself was dangerous, as if remembering too clearly might summon something. I found the house where she lived. It's still standing, abandoned now, gray stone, 2 stories, windows that watch the street like eyes that have seen too much. The door was unlocked. People don't go inside. The air smelled like dust, and something underneath the dust. Something old. The main room was empty except for marks on the floor. Circles within circles carved into the wood, mathematical, precise. I knelt down and touched them. The wood was smooth, worn down by something that had been placed there repeatedly, for years. I pulled out my phone to take a photograph. The moment I started recording, the battery died. Fully charged, dead in an instant. I tried again with a different phone. Same thing. I stood there in the silence, looking at those circles, and felt the first thread of something larger beginning to tug. 2 weeks later, I was in Samarkand. The flight was long. I spent it reading everything I could find about healing frequencies, about resonance therapy, about Tartarian architecture and its obsession with sound. Most of it was academic, dry, skeptical, dismissive, but buried in the footnotes of a 1962 Soviet acoustic survey, I found a reference to anomalous resonance chambers discovered in pre-revolutionary buildings across Central Asia. The chambers were sealed in 1947. No explanation given. The coordinates were still in the document. Samarkand in March is cold. The old city glows golden in the late afternoon sun, but there's a wind that cuts through everything. I hired a local guide, a woman in her 60s named Malika, who knew the back streets, the forgotten courtyards, the places tourists don't see. I showed her the coordinates. She looked at them for a long time, then at me. You know what you're asking about. I'm not sure, I said. Yes, you are. She folded the paper. Come back tomorrow. Early, bring no cameras. The next morning before sunrise, she led me through a maze of narrow streets. We stopped at a building that looked like it was waiting to collapse, cracked walls, empty windows, a door that hung crooked on ancient hinges. But the door was locked, a modern lock, new. Malika had a key. Inside, the air was different, cooler, dense. We descended stairs that curved down into darkness. She had a flashlight. The walls were stone, black stone, like marble but darker, smoother, carved with patterns that repeated in spirals, in waves, in geometries that hurt to look at for too long. At the bottom, a chamber, round, maybe 20 meters across. The walls rose up into a dome overhead. In the center of the floor, a circular platform of the same black stone. And on the walls, at precise intervals, small alcoves. Empty now, but you could see where something had been mounted, metal brackets, holes for fixtures, marks where objects had rested for centuries. This was a healing chamber, Malika said quietly. There were instruments, bowls made of specific metals, tuned to specific tones. They were arranged around the platform. When someone lay on the stone, the instruments would be struck in sequence. The sound would build. The chamber would respond. The walls are shaped to focus and amplify certain frequencies. How do you know this? My grandmother was brought here as a child. 1938. She was dying of something the doctors couldn't name. A woman who spoke Russian with an accent, very old, very precise, brought her here. The woman wasn't Uzbek, wasn't Russian either. She said she was maintaining the old protocols. That's the phrase my grandmother remembered, maintaining the old protocols. Malika walked to the center platform and placed her hand on it. The woman struck the bowls. My grandmother said, the sound was like water and light having a conversation. It filled the chamber. It filled her body. She could feel it in her teeth, her bones, her blood. Everything vibrated. And then she said it was like something inside her that had been crooked got straightened. She felt it happen, physically felt it. What happened to the woman? She came here every month for 2 years. Then in 1940, she stopped. My grandmother went looking for her once. Someone told her the woman had gone north, to Russia, to continue the work where it was safer. I stood in the center of the chamber, closed my eyes, tried to imagine what sound could do in a space like this. The stone under my feet felt dense, alive with potential. I pulled out a tuning fork, a 440, standard concert pitch, and struck it against my palm. The chamber responded. The sound didn't echo. It grew. It multiplied. It filled the space not as a reflection but as something amplified, focused, shaped by the geometry of the walls. I felt it in my chest, in my skull. The tuning fork went silent in my hand, but the tone kept going for 5 seconds, 10, 15. When it finally faded, Malika was watching me. Now you know, she said. Now you understand why they sealed these places. Over the next 6 months, I found 11 more chambers. Each one was similar. Black stone, precise geometry, alcoves where instruments had been removed. All of them sealed or hidden or locked behind modern doors with modern security. Tashkent, a chamber beneath a 19th century mosque. The imam wouldn't let me inside, but he confirmed it existed. Our predecessors knew things, he said. We maintain the structure. We do not use what they used. Bukhara, a chamber inside a madrasa, now converted to storage. I bribed my way in. The stone was cracked. Someone had tried to demolish it and failed. The walls rang when I tapped them. Different tones from different sections. Deliberate. Musical. The Tbilisi, a chamber discovered during metro construction in 1971. It was documented, photographed, and then buried again. The construction foreman, now 83, we were told forget what we saw. They brought in military personnel, sealed it with concrete. That stone, when we broke through the roof, the stone sang. Just from the impact of our tools, some of the men got nosebleeds. We finished the job and never spoke of it. Each location had been active until the 1940s. Each had been used for healing. Each had been shut down systematically between 1946 and 1950. And in each city, there were stories about an old woman. Different names, different descriptions, but always the same details. Russian accent. Very old, very precise. She knew how to use the chambers. She traveled between cities. She was maintaining something. In Almaty, I met a man who claimed his mother had been healed by her in 1955. We sat in a cafe that smelled like cardamom and old cigarettes. He was in his 70s, a former engineer, skeptical by nature and training. But when he talked about his mother, the skepticism vanished. She had cancer, stomach, terminal. The doctors gave her 3 months. My father heard about an old woman living on the edge of the city who did alternative treatments. He was desperate. We went. What was she like? Small, very upright. She spoke Russian perfectly, but you could tell it wasn't her first language. There was something underneath it, something older, Her house was ordinary except for one room. She took my mother into that room alone. I waited outside with my father. We could hear the sound. He stopped, looked out the window. It wasn't loud, but it penetrated everything. The walls, the floor. I felt it in my bones. My father started crying. He didn't know why. The sound was... It was like something beautiful and terrible at the same time, like standing at the edge of something vast. How long did it last? Maybe 20 minutes. When my mother came out, she looked exhausted, but she was smiling. The old woman told her to rest for 3 days. No food, only water. Then to return. Did she? She returned 6 times over 2 months. Each time, the same sound. Each time my mother looked younger, stronger. By the 4th visit, the pain was gone. By the 6th, the doctors couldn't find the tumor. They ran every test. Nothing. They told us it was a misdiagnosis, but we'd seen the original scans. We had the pathology reports. What happened to the old woman? She left suddenly. 1957, I think. Someone told my father she'd gone west. Back to Russia. To Astrachan. She said her work was that she was the last one who knew how, that when she died, the knowledge would die with her. He looked at me directly. My mother lived another 40 years, healthy. No recurrence. She died in a car accident, not from disease. The old woman gave her 4 decades. He paused. What do you call someone who can do that? I didn't have an answer. The pattern was becoming clear. Healing chambers, dozens of them, maybe hundreds distributed across the old Tartarian territories, Central Asia, Eastern Europe, Southern Russia, all built with the same black stone, the same mathematical precision, all designed to focus and amplify specific frequencies. And someone or some group had maintained them for centuries, had kept the knowledge alive, had traveled between cities, teaching, healing, preserving, until they stopped, until they were... I started looking for documentation of the shutdown. Official records, government orders, anything that would explain why healing chambers used for centuries were suddenly sealed, demolished, or restricted in the span of 4 years. The archives in Tashkent had nothing. The records from 1946, 1950 were missing. Not classified. Missing. The gaps were obvious, box after box with numbers that skipped entire years. In Moscow, I found something. A reference in a declassified KGB document from 1959. It was tangential, a footnote in a report about liquidation of pseudoscientific practices in Soviet republics. One line, frequency-based healing apparatus and associated documentation fully secured as of December 1958. Remaining practitioners neutralized. Neutralized. I read that line 20 times, felt something cold settle in my chest. I started looking for researchers who'd studied these chambers, who'd published about them, who'd tried to preserve the knowledge. I found 7 names. All of them stopped publishing between 1947 and 1959. All of them died or disappeared within 2 years of their last paper. None of the deaths were suspicious on paper, heart attacks, accidents, sudden illness, but the timing, the pattern. In Leningrad, I found the daughter of one of these researchers, Dr. Viktor Sokolov. He published extensively on acoustic resonance in historical architecture until 1956, then silence. He died in 1957, officially, a stroke. His daughter Irina was in her 70s. She invited me to her apartment, small, cramped, filled with her father's books. He was obsessed, she said. He'd discovered something in old buildings across Central Asia, chambers designed for specific acoustic properties. He believed they were used for healing. He had measurements, recordings, analysis. He was going to publish a comprehensive study. What happened? Men came. 1956. They said they were from the Academy of Sciences. They wanted to see his work. He showed them. They seemed interested, encouraging. They left with copies of everything. She poured tea. Her hands shook. 2 weeks later, different men came. They weren't from the academy. They didn't say who they were. They told my father his research was incompatible with Soviet scientific principles. They took his files, his recordings, his instruments. They told him to stop. He refused. And then, he became paranoid. He said he was being followed. He said his lab had been broken into, even though nothing appeared disturbed. He started hiding copies of his work. He gave me a notebook, told me to keep it safe, to never tell anyone I had it. Do you still have it? She looked at me for a long time. Then she stood, went to a bookshelf, pulled out a copy of Tolstoy, and opened it. Inside, hollowed out, a leather notebook, small, worn. She handed it to me. He died 3 months after they came. The doctors said, stroke. But my father was healthy. He exercised. He was only 53. She paused. The night before he died, he told me something. He said, they're afraid of what these chambers prove. Not about healing, about who we were, about what we've forgotten. I opened the notebook. The pages were filled with measurements, frequencies, geometric calculations, diagrams of chamber layouts, and on the last page, a single sentence in careful Cyrillic. The optimal healing frequency is 172.8 hertz. Zoya Petrovna used this frequency. She was correct. Zoya Petrovna. The name I'd heard in Astrachan. The old woman. I went back to Russia, back to the Volga. Started asking different questions. In the regional archives in Astrachan, I found a birth record. Zoya Petrovna Kuznetsova, born 1872, place of birth listed as unknown Central Asia, arrived in Astrachan 1920, registered as medical practitioner, traditional. 1872. If that was accurate, she was 86 when she died in 1958. Old, but not impossibly old. But there was something strange about the record. The handwriting changed halfway through, as if someone had added information later, and the birth year looked wrong. The ink was different, slightly darker. I found a census record from 1930. Zoya Petrovna Kuznetsova, listed as 90 years old. That would make her birth year 1840, not 1872. I found another census from 1950, same name, listed as 104 years old. Birth year 1846. The dates didn't match. Someone had been altering records, or she'd been lying about her age, or something else was happening. I found a photograph in a regional history collection, dated 1935. A group of medical workers. In the back row, a small woman with upright posture and piercing eyes. The caption identified her as Z.P. Kuznetsova, traditional healer. I found another photograph, dated 1895, a gathering of healers in Samarkand, a young woman standing slightly apart from the same eyes. If that was her in 1895, and she was young, maybe 30, she would have been born around 1865, which would make her 93 when she died in 1958. Or she was much, much older than anyone realized. I started looking for people who knew her, who remembered her, not as patients, but as colleagues, as neighbors, as anyone who saw her daily life. In Astrachan, I found a man who'd lived next door to her in the 1950s. He was 96, frail but sharp. Zoya Petrovna, he said, and smiled. Everyone knew her. She'd been there forever. When I was a child, my grandmother said Zoya Petrovna had been old when she was a child. We thought it was an exaggeration. But when I moved next door to her in 1950, she looked exactly as my grandmother had described her. Exactly, down to the same dress. Did she age? Not that I could see. I lived next to her for 8 years. She looked the same in 1958 as she did in 1950. Same face, same posture, same energy. She moved like someone 40 years old. What did she do? She healed people. They came from everywhere. She'd let them into her house, one at a time. You could hear the sound, always the same sound. Like a bell made of water. It would last 15-20 minutes. Then they'd leave. Some of them crying, some of them laughing. None of them the same as when they went in. Did anyone ever ask her how she did it? Of course, she'd say she was maintaining old knowledge. That she'd been trained in the old schools. That there used to be hundreds like her, but she was the last. She said the knowledge was dying. That when she died, it would die with her, unless someone learned. Did anyone learn? She tried to teach a few people, doctors mostly. They'd come to study with her. None of them could do what she did. She said they didn't have the sensitivity, that you had to feel the frequencies, not just produce them, that it took decades to develop the sensitivity. Most of them gave up. He was quiet for a moment. In 1957, men came. Foreign men, Americans, I think, and Russians, government types. They spent an afternoon with her. When they left, she was different, quieter, afraid, maybe. She stopped seeing patients for a few weeks. Then she started again, but urgently, as if she was running out of time. What happened when she died? It was sudden. One day she was fine. The next morning, her door was open. She was in her chair, dead. Looked peaceful. But the house had been searched, not ransacked. Professionally searched. Drawers open. Books pulled from shelves and replaced carefully. Someone had been through everything. Who? The police said natural causes. But that night, I saw trucks, official vehicles, men in suits. They were inside her house for hours. When they left, they took boxes, many boxes. The next day, the house was empty, completely empty, as if she'd never lived there. He looked at his hands. I went inside once, after. The floors still had those marks, those circles. The wood was still smooth where something had rested for decades. I touched the center of the largest circle. It was warm. She'd been dead for 3 days, and that spot was warm. I needed to understand what she'd been doing. what frequencies she'd been using, why it mattered enough to classify. I contacted acoustic physicists, sound engineers, researchers who studied resonance effects on biological systems. Most of them dismissed me. Healing with sound was pseudoscience. Resonance couldn't affect cancer cells. Frequencies couldn't restructure tissue. But a few were curious. Dr. Helena Martinsen, a Norwegian physicist studying somatics, agreed to talk. We met in Oslo. She'd spent 20 years analyzing how sound creates geometric patterns in matter. I showed her Dr. Sokolov's notebook, the measurements. The frequency, 172.8 hertz. She was quiet for a long time. That's a very specific number, she finally said. It's not arbitrary. That frequency has properties. It's in the range where sound can affect cellular structures. At certain amplitudes and durations, frequencies in that range can cause resonance in cell membranes. It can change cellular permeability, affect ion channels, influence cellular metabolism. Could it heal? In theory, maybe. If the frequency is precise enough, if it's sustained long enough, if the environment is controlled, echo-free, or specifically designed to amplify and focus the frequency. But you'd need equipment we didn't have until the 1980s. You'd need understanding of bioacoustics that didn't exist until recently. She stopped. What? You'd need to know something we don't know, something we've only begun to discover in the last decade. She looked at the notebook again. This measurement is from 1956. Yes. That's impossible. The equipment to measure frequencies to that precision, to one decimal place, didn't exist then. Not in the Soviet Union. Not anywhere. She flipped through the pages. These calculations about chamber geometry, about reflection and amplification. This is sophisticated acoustic engineering. Master's level, at minimum. This Dr. Sokolov, he was ahead of his time. What if he wasn't? What do you mean? What if he was just recording what someone showed him? What if someone already knew this? Had known it for a long time? She looked at me carefully. You're suggesting pre-existing knowledge. I'm suggesting that these chambers existed for centuries, that people used them successfully, that someone maintained that knowledge, and that when the last person who knew died, the knowledge died with her. Dr. Martinsen closed the notebook, slid it back to me. If that's true, she said slowly, then we lost something profound, something we're only now beginning to rediscover through decades of research and millions in funding. And someone decided we should lose it, which means they understood what it meant. What did it mean? That's the question, isn't it? Why suppress healing? Why classify a frequency? She paused. Unless the frequency proved something about who built those chambers, something about what they understood, something about what we've forgotten. I started looking for the classification order, the document that made 172.8 hertz officially secret. It took months of FOIA requests, contacts in defense research, and conversations with retired military personnel who'd worked on acoustic weapons programs. I found references, oblique mentions, but never the document itself. What I found instead was a pattern. In 1959, NATO and Warsaw Pact countries both established classified research programs into bioacoustic effects. Both programs focused on frequencies between 160 and 180 hertz. Both programs had military applications, disorienting enemy personnel, non-lethal crowd control, psychological warfare. But buried in the budgets, in the footnotes, there were research lines that didn't fit the military narrative, studies on cellular regeneration, tissue repair, resonance-based medical protocols. Someone was researching what Zoya Petrovna had known how to do. I found a retired DARPA researcher living in Virginia, Dr. James Warren. He'd worked on acoustic programs in the 1960s and 70s. He agreed to talk off the record. We sat in his living room. He was 87, sharp, careful with his words. You're asking about frequency-based healing, he said. That's still classified. Why? Because it works. Or it did, under very specific conditions. He leaned back. In the early 60s, we were given equipment from a Soviet defector. Instruments made of specific metal alloys, tuned to very precise frequencies. We didn't understand them at first. The metallurgy was strange. The craftsmanship was pre-industrial, but the precision was beyond what we could achieve even then. Where did they come from? The defector said they'd been seized from an old woman in southern Russia. She'd been using them for healing. The KGB had been studying her for years. They didn't understand how she achieved the results she did, but the results were undeniable. Tumors disappearing, chronic pain eliminated, even regeneration of damaged tissue. What happened? We tested the instruments. They produced a primary frequency, around 172 hertz, with very specific harmonics. When we replicated the frequency using our equipment, we got effects. Measurable effects on living tissue. Cell cultures grew faster. Wounds healed quicker. It wasn't placebo. It was real. Why isn't this being used? He was quiet for a long time. Because we couldn't control it. The frequency had to be exact. The environment had to be right. The duration, the amplitude, everything had to be perfect. We could replicate the results, maybe one time in 50. The old woman, apparently, never failed. She'd been doing it for decades. Hundreds of successful treatments. 0 failures. How? That's what we couldn't figure out. It wasn't just the frequency. She was doing something else, something we couldn't measure. The defectors said she could feel the patient, that she adjusted the frequency in real time based on something she perceived. We had no idea what that meant. Did you ever find out? No. The program was shut down in 1978. All the research was classified. The instruments were locked away. We were told to stop. Why? Official reason. Resource allocation. Practical reason. He looked at me directly. Someone in the Pentagon realized what this technology implied, that someone a long time ago had built chambers specifically designed to amplify these frequencies, that they'd understood human physiology at a level we still don't understand, that there was a lost civilization, call it what you want, Tartaria, the old empire, that knew things we don't know. And that was threatening. History is threatening when it contradicts the narrative. We're taught that progress is linear, that we're more advanced than our ancestors. That knowledge accumulates and compounds. But what if that's wrong? What if there have been peaks and valleys? What if we're climbing back up to knowledge that was once common? He stood up, walked to the window. They didn't want that question asked, so they classified the frequency, locked away the instruments, and made sure that anyone who knew how to use them couldn't teach. I went to Moscow, to the State Archive, requested access to KGB files on Zoya Petrovna Kuznetsova. Request denied. Files still classified. I tried the Ministry of Health, historical records of medical practitioners in Astrachan, 1920, 1960. The records existed, but pages were missing. Entire years gone. The gaps were precise, surgical. I found a retired archivist who'd worked in the building in the 1980s. She agreed to meet in a cafe near Gorky Park. You're asking about the healer files, she said. I remember those. I was told never to mention them. Why? They were under permanent seal, not just classified. Sealed. That's different. Classified documents can be requested, reviewed, declassified eventually. Sealed documents are meant to never be seen again. She sipped her coffee. I saw them once. 1980s, there was a filing error. The box was mislabeled. I opened it before I realized what was inside. Reports, medical reports. Hundreds of them. Patient names, dates, conditions, outcomes. All from Astrachan. All from one practitioner. The results were, she paused. Impossible. Stage 4 cancers in full remission. Congenital heart defects reversed. Neurological conditions resolved. Over and over. Decades of impossible cures. What happened to the box? I reported the mislabeling. 2 men came from the security office within an hour. They took the box. They asked me what I'd seen. I said I hadn't looked inside. They didn't believe me. But they couldn't prove otherwise. They told me the documents didn't exist. That if I mentioned them, I'd lose my position. Did you keep anything? She looked around the cafe. Then reached into her purse. Pulled out a folded piece of paper. I took 1 page. Just one. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't let it all disappear. She unfolded it carefully. It was a medical report, dated 1953. Patient Mikhail Volkov, age 34. Diagnosis, acute myeloid leukemia, advanced. Prognosis, terminal, 2-3 months. Treatment by CP. That's CP, Kuznetsova. Method, resonance therapy. Primary frequency 172.8 hertz. Duration 28 minutes per session. 6 sessions over 3 weeks. Outcome complete remission. Patient asymptomatic. Follow-up examination shows no remaining cancer cells. Hematologist notes. Medically unexplained. At the bottom, a handwritten note in Russian. Patient alive and healthy as of 1987. No recurrence. Requesting case file be preserved for future research. Request denied. She refolded the paper. That man should be dead. He lived 34 years longer than his prognosis. Maybe he's still alive, because an old woman in Astrachan hummed at him for 28 minutes. I tried to find Mikhail Volkov. The name was common, but with the birth year from the medical report, I narrowed it down, contacted registry offices, placed ads in regional newspapers. 3 months later, I got a response. A letter from a woman in Moscow, Elena Volkova, Mikhail's daughter. My father died in 2003. He was 84. He'd been healthy his entire life after 1953. He attributed it to Zoya Petrovna. He spoke of her often, said she'd given him 50 extra years. Before he died, he made me promise something. He said, if anyone ever asked about her, about what she did, I should tell them the truth, that it was real, that she was real, that what she knew should not be forgotten. I called her. She answered on the second ring. Older voice, careful. You're the one asking about Zoya Petrovna, she said. Yes. My father wanted me to give something to anyone who came asking. He said eventually someone would. Someone who was trying to preserve the memory. She paused. Can you meet me? 2 days later, I was in her apartment. Small, filled with books and family photographs. She served tea and bread with honey. My father kept a box, she said, hidden. He said it was evidence, that if the truth ever needed proving, this was proof. She brought out a wooden box, old, plain. Inside, photographs, letters, a small metal object wrapped in cloth. The photographs showed her father, young, vibrant, standing next to a small, upright woman. Zoya Petrovna, different years, 1953, 1954, 1955, 1957. In each photo, she looked exactly the same. The letters were from her father's doctor, dated 1953 through 1965, each one confirming no cancer detected, patient remains healthy, no medical explanation for recovery. The metal object was a tuning fork. I unwrapped it carefully. Heavy, made of an alloy I couldn't identify. Inscribed along one arm, 172.8. She gave this to my father, Elena said. After his last session, she said, if anyone ever tells you what I did was impossible, strike this, and remember, the sound doesn't lie. I struck the fork against the table. The tone was pure, perfect. It filled the small room. I felt it in my chest, in my teeth. Elena closed her eyes. That's it, she said quietly. That's the sound I remember from childhood. My father would strike that fork sometimes, just to remember, just to know he wasn't crazy. The tone sustained, longer than any tuning fork I'd used. 20 seconds. 30. When it finally faded, the air felt different, lighter. She knew, Elena said. She knew they'd come for her. She knew they'd take everything. That's why she gave that to my father. So something would survive. I have held that tuning fork in 12 different cities now. Struck it in labs, in acoustic chambers, in old buildings with the right geometry. Each time, the result is the same. In Tbilisi, a researcher measured the decay rate. Impossible, he said. Metal alloys don't sustain vibration like this. This fork should ring for maybe 8 seconds. It's ringing for 40. In Berlin, a metallurgist analyzed a microscopic sample. I've never seen this composition. It's not modern. The crystalline structure suggests hand forging, but the precision of the alloy ratio requires industrial processes we didn't have until the 1970s. In Prague, an acoustic physicist recorded the harmonics. This frequency has overtones at exactly 345.6 Hz, 518.4 Hz, and 691.2 Hz. Perfect integer, multiples. That doesn't happen naturally. That's engineered. Someone designed this to produce these specific harmonics. And in each city, people wanted to know where I got it, who made it. If there were more, I told them the truth. It came from a woman who died in 1958. A woman who knew how to heal with sound. A woman who learned from someone who learned from someone who learned from a tradition that stretched back centuries, maybe millennia. And they didn't believe me, until I struck the fork in a chamber in Warsaw. An old chamber, sealed since 1948, recently reopened for architectural study, black stone, circular, the same geometry I'd seen in Samarkand. When the fork rang, the chamber responded. The walls hummed, the floor vibrated. The researcher standing next to me gasped. I feel it, he said, in my chest, my bones. What is that? The tone sustained. And sustained. The chamber amplified it, held it, shaped it. For 3 minutes that single tone filled the space. When it faded, the researcher sat down. I had chronic back pain, he said slowly, for 15 years. Car accident, 3 vertebrae damaged. I've learned to live with it. He stood up, moved carefully, then less carefully. It's gone. The pain is gone, completely. He looked at me, at the fork, at the chamber. How is that possible? I don't know, but I know it happened. I went back to Astrachan one last time. The woman who told me her story, the woman who'd been healed as a child, was still alive, still healthy, still 91 years old with hands that didn't shake. I showed her the tuning fork. She started crying. That's hers, she whispered. That's Zoya Petrovna's fork. She had several different frequencies. This was the primary one, the healing one. She held out her hand. May I? I gave it to her. She struck it against the table. The sound filled the small apartment. She closed her eyes. There it is, she said. After all these years, I never forgot that sound. It's been inside me, waiting. She let the fork go silent. Did you find others? Did anyone else survive who knew her? A few, not many. She told me something once. I was maybe 12. I asked her where she learned. She said she was taught by her grandmother, who was taught by hers, who was taught by hers. An unbroken chain going back to the time before forgetting. That's the phrase she used. The time before forgetting. Did she say what was forgotten? That we're not the first, that there have been others. That they built the chambers, the towers, the cities, that they understood sound and light and frequency. That they used these things not for war but for life, for healing, for connecting. She said the world was quieter then, that people could hear what the stones were saying. She handed the fork back to me. She said the forgetting was deliberate, that someone decided we should forget, that the chambers were sealed, the knowledge suppressed, the teachers silenced. She said she was the last one who remembered the whole system, that when she died, only fragments would remain. Why tell you this? Because I asked, because I was young and I'd been healed and I wanted to understand. She said, remember this. Someday, people will try to remember again. When they do, tell them it was real. Tell them the chambers worked. Tell them the frequency was 172.8. Tell them I was the last, and I'm sorry I couldn't teach more. The woman looked at me. So I'm telling you, it was real. The chambers, the frequency is 172.8 hertz. She was the last, and she was sorry. Before I left Astrachan, I went to Zoya Petrovna's house one more time. It's still empty, still waiting. The circles are still on the floor. I brought the tuning fork, stood in the center of the largest circle, struck the fork. The sound filled the empty house, and the wood responded. I felt it through my feet. A vibration, slight but definite. The floor remembering what used to happen here, I closed my eyes, tried to imagine hundreds of people coming through that door, lying on that spot, hearing that, walking out changed, healed, given more time. And then I imagined the last day, Zoya Petrovna sitting in her chair, knowing they were coming, knowing everything she knew would die with her, knowing the chambers would stay sealed, knowing the frequency would be classified. Did she feel defeated, or did she know that sounds don't really die? That they echo? That someone, eventually, would find the fork, strike it, remember? The vibration faded. The house went quiet, but not silent, never silent, because I could still feel it. That frequency, 172.8 hertz, humming in the walls, in the floor, in the stones themselves, patient, waiting for someone to remember how to listen. There are protocols in place now. Frequencies between 170 and 175 hertz are classified in most NATO countries. Research into resonance-based healing is restricted. The old chambers that haven't been demolished are sealed, guarded, or buried under modern construction. The official explanation is safety, that these frequencies at certain amplitudes could be dangerous, could be weaponized. But I've read the classified abstracts. I've talked to researchers who worked on the programs. I know what they found. The frequencies aren't dangerous. They're revolutionary. Because if a woman in Astrachan could heal terminal cancer with nothing but a tuning fork and a room with the right geometry, then everything we think we know about medicine is incomplete. Everything we've built, the pharmaceutical industry, the medical establishment, the trillion-dollar healthcare systems, is based on the assumption that healing requires intervention, chemicals, surgery. But what if it doesn't? What if healing is about resonance? About finding the right frequency for the right condition and letting sound do what drugs can't? What if our ancestors knew this? What if they built it into their architecture? What if the chambers, the towers, the sacred spaces weren't religious? They were medical. That's what Zoya Petrovna proved. That's what they classified, not the technology. The implication, that we forgot something essential, that we've been climbing back toward knowledge our ancestors considered basic, that the story we tell ourselves about progress might be wrong. I still have the fork. I carry it with me. Sometimes I strike it. Listen to that perfect tone. Feel it in my bones. Sometimes people ask what it is. I tell them. Evidence of what was, of what could be again. Most of them don't understand. They hear a tuning fork, metal vibrating, nothing special. But occasionally someone listens deeper, feels the harmonics, the way the sound lingers, the way it seems to do something to the air, and they ask, where did you get this? And I tell them about an old woman in Astrachan, about chambers built with impossible precision, about a frequency that healed when everything else failed. Some of them think I'm crazy, but some of them remember. They tell me their grandmother spoke of healers who used sound. Their great-uncle was cured of something that should have killed him. They've heard stories, fragments, whispers of knowledge that wasn't supposed to survive. And slowly, piece by piece, we're rebuilding what was broken. It won't be the same. We don't have the chambers. We don't have the training. We don't have teachers who spent decades learning to feel the frequencies. But we have fragments. We have measurements. We have that fork vibrating at exactly 172.8 hertz. And we have the knowledge that it worked. that it was real, that someone for centuries maintained this technology and used it to heal. That's not nothing. That's a beginning. Sometimes I think about what she must have felt. Zoya Petrovna, the last one who knew, watching the world change around her, watching the chambers sealed, watching her fellow practitioners disappear, die, go silent, knowing the knowledge was dying, knowing she couldn't save it. Did she feel like a failure? Or did she know the way stones know, the way frequency knows, that nothing is ever truly lost? That sounds echo? That someone would find the fork, strike it, hear the tone, and remember. I think she knew. I think that's why she gave that fork to Mikhail Volkov. Why she told her secrets to a 12-year-old girl. Why she kept healing until the very end, even when they were watching, even when she knew they'd come. Because once you've heard that sound, once you've felt 172.8 hertz resonating in your bones, you can't unhear it. You can't unfeel it. It becomes part of you. It waits. And when the world is ready to remember, when people start asking the right questions, when someone finally listens, the sound is still there. The chambers still wait. Empty but not dead. The stones still remember what they were built to do. And somewhere, in an apartment in Astrachan, in a lab in Berlin, in a cafe in Prague, someone strikes a tuning fork, feels the vibration, and wonders, what else did we forget? What else is waiting to be remembered? What else could we heal? If we just knew how to listen. The stairs still descend in Samarkand. The chamber still waits beneath the earth. The black stone is patient. It has been patient for centuries. It can wait longer. In Tbilisi, behind concrete and locked doors, the walls still ring when struck. In Warsaw, beneath the modern city, the geometry still focuses sound the way it was designed to. In a dozen cities, in 100 places, the evidence persists, not in documents, not in official records, but in stone. In metal alloys we can't reproduce, in measurements we can't explain, and in bodies, in 91-year-old hands that don't shake, in tumors that disappeared, in pain that ended, in decades of life that shouldn't have been possible. The evidence lives, in flesh and bone, in stories passed down, in that fork that rings longer than it should. Zoya Petrovna died in 1958. The frequency she used is classified, but the sound doesn't care about classification. The sound is still there. In the chambers, in the walls, in the memory of stone, waiting. For someone to remember how to listen, for someone to strike the fork, for someone to stand in the center of an empty room and feel the floor vibrate with knowledge that refused to die. She was the last. But sound doesn't end. It echoes. And somewhere, someone is listening.